Hey students, welcome back to Mr. Lawhon's AP European History class. I'm going to try to I'm going to try to kind of talk a little bit quieter because I'm using a different microphone. I left my Blue Yeti microphone at home. So you're getting I don't even know what kind of microphone this is, but hey, it's better than nothing. Well, guys, in class, we already did 12.1 notes. They're not online, but they're in class. And in 12.1, recall, we talked about what it means or what it meant in the 19th century to be a liberal or a conservative or a nationalist. And today we're going to kind of continue that thought with essential question 12.2, and we're going to talk about how did people in the 19th century define nationalism, all right? So we're going to focus on nationalism today. So pause if you need to, and let's get into this riveting conversation. Pause if you need to. Okay, so we talked about in our very first lesson of notes in class, we talked about how most of Europe after the French Revolution is still pretty conservative. We talked about how terrified they are of liberal ideas spreading through, the ideas of the French Revolution spreading all over Europe and disrupting Europe, and they're afraid that nobles all over Europe will start ending up in guillotines as soon as the Napoleonic Code spread everywhere and people start thinking, oh, hey, I'm a peasant. I've got these things called natural rights. What? So anyway, all of conservative Europe is terrified of liberalism, but another thing that they're going to be afraid of is nationalism. So today we're going to talk about these two forces of change, but we're only going to focus on nationalism. We'll focus on liberalism tomorrow. So real quick, let's dive in to nationalism, okay? Now, people, back up. What is nationalism? Well, if you go back to slide 3 of yesterday's notes, I give you a really great definition of nationalism, but it's basically people who share the same kinds of similarities. Maybe people in a certain area all recognize that they speak the same language, and they're like, ooh, we should make a nation. Or maybe there's people in the same area that all feel like they share the same vague idea of a culture or a history or religion, or they share all of these things. Well, what they do is they all get together and they say, hey, we're all the same. We should all be ruled by the same government. And that's the idea of nationalism, all right? People that share very similar characteristics and they get together and they say, let's make a nation, all right? Now, another thing about nationalism is this idea that political and ethnic boundaries should be the same. Now, let me tell you what I mean there. You see, this has not been the case in Europe. A lot of European nations are pretty, I guess, multicultural, multi-ethnic, all right? You've got all different kinds of people. For instance, if you looked at the Austrian Empire, they've got Bosnians and Serbs and Slavs and Austrians and Germans and Hungarians and Romanians. They've got all these different people, right? And they all make up the Austrian, or the old Holy Roman Empire, right? Well, that's a whole bunch of different kinds of people, a whole bunch of different kinds of ethnicities, and they all share the same political boundary. Well, this is saying, this new idea is one ethnicity should have their own political boundary. Like everybody in this border should be, Polish. All right? Or everybody in this border should be German. Okay? So that's kind of nationalism. It's the idea of you don't have multi-ethnic states. You have every ethnicity has their own state. Okay? All right, now, we talked about the Congress of Vienna, right? The Congress of Vienna, one of their whole goals when Napoleon was getting beat and the Quadruple Alliance all ganged up, the Congress of Vienna said, look, we are going to reinstall kings all across Europe, all right? And rule is going to be by kings. Well, guys, a nationalist would disagree with that. A nationalist would say rule doesn't need to be based on kings. It needs to be based on nationality, all right? Our nation needs to be ruled by one person that is also similar to our nation. So all of these are kind of new ideas. If you're German, now look at this. I'll show you a picture right here, guys. Hold on right there. You see Germany right there, right? Germany is a huge mess, right? It always has been. The old Holy Roman Empire, if you remember way back in the early chapters like the Reformation, chapter 3, 4, you saw this big mess, 1,000 different states ran by 1,000 different rulers, guys. It was crazy. But nationalists would believe all people in the area that are called German states, they should all make one nation. Why? Well, they all speak German. All people that live in Italy, Italy's down below, guys. It's that part of land that looks like a boot, right? Italy, right now, they're made up of 13 different states. And Italian nationalists would say, hey, why are we all 13 different states? We should just unite into one state because we all speak Italian. Okay? So that's the idea. Nationalists believe that everybody that shares these similarities should have one united nation, not separate states. Now here's the problem. The problem was that Europe is not neatly divided by people that share nationality in the same territory, right? You might have some Germans living in one area, but there's also Slavic people mixed in. You might have some French people that live in an area in eastern France, but there's German people mixed in there. Or maybe there's British people living in northern France. It's not so neat and tidy. Okay? So that's a big problem. What do you do with those people that are in your borders, but they're not your people? You kick them out? What do you do? So that's one of the biggest problems. Nationalists kind of believe that all people that share similarities should be in the same political borders, but Europe is so mixed and ethnicities are so kind of, meshed in with everybody else, it's hard to separate and pull out people and make your own nation. That's going to be a problem. Pause if you need to. Oh, back. I lied. So guys, like I said, most European states were multi-ethnic, multilingual, multicultural, and multi-religious. Although they might be Christian, you might have Catholics and different kinds of Protestants, and some Jews, maybe some Muslims thrown in there. So like I said, guys, nationalists have an ideal. The ideal is a perfect state with the all of the same ethnicity. But in reality, guys, it's hard to do because every state's mixed up with every group of different people. All right? Pause if you need to. Okay, creating a nation, right? So, when you talk about creating a nation, it's really interesting, guys. And this is something that was like, the Matrix for me when I was younger and I learned about this. It was like mind-blowing. All right? What makes a nation? Why do we call the United States the United States? Who came up with this idea of what it means to be an American, right? Well, it's interesting. 19th century nationalists that want to unite an area into one country, they started to think, okay, if we're going to unite everybody, we all have to share a history. So nationalists went around and said, hey, let's write a history of our people. Scholars got together and they're like, let's collect evidence for our people. Linguists, they got together and they went through the different areas and they said, okay, this is German, but this over here is German, but it's a little bit of different dialect. How do we get together and make one language, right? And all of these guys got together to compile histories and all the folk tales of a group of people, all the literature, all the official languages. And what they're going to do, guys, is they're going to gather and they're going to say, if we're going to unite Germany into one big nation, well, what does that mean to be German? And in order to answer that question, guys, they got to go around to all the German states, collect all the folk tales, all the history, collect all the language, and they've got to decide what does it mean to be German. Now, here's the crazy part, guys. Who gets to decide that? One German state might have a different idea than another German state about what it means to be German. Well, whose idea do you go with? That's a big problem. But anyway, these histories and these folk tales and these languages were ultimately compiled, and the government got to decide, hey, this is what we are going to be about. All right, now think about that, guys. Who decided what America was originally going to be about? Well, the government got together and, they did the same thing. They collected folk tales and all of these things, and they were built into all this ideology, and they said, this is what it means to be an American. And then once you have a clear ideal of what it means to be your government, you know what you do? You write textbooks and you start teaching young people in school. Why? Because young people are impressionable and they'll learn. So you start young people at a very young age. This is what it means to be German. This is what it means to be Italian. This is what the official language is. No, you sound weird. You're speaking that weird dialect. You're going to speak the official language. Now, guys, think about that. Schools enforce this idea of nationhood. Why do we believe the things that we believe about our nation? It's because we were taught these things. And when you get older, you start asking these questions. That's interesting. Is this really what it means to be in this nation? Because I see things differently, right? But that's what happens, okay? The government decides, hey, we're going to compile all these histories, and this is what it means to be in our nation, right? Soon, schools are going to force kids to speak an official language, all right? So in Germany, they're going to say, hey, like the Prussians are going to say, hey, I don't know what you're speaking down there in Bavaria, but we don't like that kind of German. You're going to start speaking this kind of German. And everybody is going to be forced to speak the same kind of language in the schools and in the universities and things like that. Now, do people always keep their own little words and their own little diverse dialects? Of course they do. We all speak, well, not all of us, but a lot of us speak English in this country, right? It's not the official language because people speak Spanish and people speak all kinds of languages in this country. But most people speak English, right? But English isn't the same. English in California sounds a lot different than English down in Louisiana. All right, or English up in New York. We all are speaking the same language, but we say different words and we use different dialects, right? But anyway, we all have this official English language. And if you don't believe me, guys, look in the dictionary because that technically is the official authority on language, all right? So guys, schools were kind of a tool of the government to instill nationalist ideas into the minds of young people. And in the 1800s, one of the things that you're going to see is the governments of these countries are going to instill certain ideals into young people's mind. One of the things that they're going to instill is you are part of this nation. You are special. You are unique. Those guys in that nation over there, they're not like you. They're different than you. And then what that does, guys, is it creates this concept of the other. Now, guys, if you create a concept of the other, you're kind of creating a future enemy to yourself, right? Okay? Other things they're taught in school, loyalty to your nation. When we get throughout this class, guys, by the end of the third quarter, we're already talking about the kinds of racial ideology that are being taught in schools, like some races are better than others. Guys, it's crazy what governments do and how governments use schools to instill ideals into young people, all right? But that all starts in the 19th century. Often, like I said, scholars would disagree and argue about who was official or what language was official or what history was official, and they kind of have to argue it out. But eventually, guys, European nations are going to come up with official languages, official histories, and whatever, and that's what gets taught. Now, as we've talked about bias before, guys, are these official languages and histories and everything biased? Of course they are, all right? The people that are in power, they're the ones that get to decide, right? But this is how you create a nation. The government enlists intellectuals to collect evidence. All the evidence is fought over and argued over until you come up with, this is what we are going to be. And then you start teaching it in schools. Pretty crazy, right, guys? Like I said, that was kind of a matrix moment for me when I was in my early 20s. I was like, holy crap, all the stuff I've been taught, is this stuff even real or is it imagined? Well, guys, good question. All right, pause if you need to. All right, next thing here. Well, okay, we kind of decided how to create a nation, but here comes a bigger question. Who gets to be a nation, right? So it was a big question in the 19th century because, like I said, a lot of the nations weren't so cookie cutter. You know, there weren't all Germans lived in this area and all French lived separately in this area. Everybody was kind of mixed together, especially if you lived on borders. If you lived on these areas that were right on the border between like France or Germany and Austria, then you were mixed. You were a little bit of both, right? A little bit of everything. Okay. So when you are a diverse nation, who gets to be their own nation, right? So the best answer, guys, and like I said, I read a book in college in my master's degree, and it was called Nations and Nationalism, and it was one of the most legendary British historians. His name was Eric Hobsbawm, and it was a very small book, guys, but he tried to lay out, you know, who gets to be a nation, what it means to be a nation, guys, and it's bottom line is it's very tough to decide what gets to be a nation, right? Like who gets to be one, and if you had to like lay it all out, all right, basically this is what this guy would have said. Who gets to be a nation? Well, you have to be a large enough group, Okay, it can't be just a tiny group of like 3 people that say, we are our own nation and this is our land. You've got to be a large enough group that have a viable means stable or working. You have to have like a viable economy, which means you are a group of people that have your own economy. You make your own goods, you sell your own goods out to other places, you buy goods from other places. You have to have like a significant history that you can trace back. And guys, let's be honest, one of the biggest things is you have to have kind of your own military, right? You have to be able to defend yourself. Those things, if you are a group of people that met that criteria, you would be a good candidate for probably having a successful nation. The only problem is, guys, there's lots of people in this time period that fit that criteria, but are not allowed by more powerful people to have their own nation. So, like I just now said, small groups will claim to meet these criteria, and they're going to be like, hey, we should have our own nation. And that's going to cause a lot of civil wars because these people that rule are going to be like, no, you've got to do what we say. And those people are going to be like, heck no, we don't. I've got my own army. I'm going to fight you. One of the biggest cases of that, guys, is right here on this map. All right, this is the Austrian Empire in the 1900s. Now, guys, technically, Austria controls all of this land. But guys, all of these people are not the same. Croat people, Slavic people, Bosnians, Hungarians, Transylvanians, all of Bohemians, all of these different people, guys, speak different languages, have different cultures, have different religions, but they're all controlled by Austrians. And a lot of these people are going to say, hey, we want our own country, but the Austrian government's going to say no. And there's going to be countless wars. As a matter of fact, guys, one of the big ones, World War I, is going to start because some of these people want their own nation, and Austria won't give it to them. Okay? So guys, who gets to be a nation? Well, that's tough to decide. But like I say, generally you meet those criteria. A viable economy, history, and some form of military that can fight other people off. All right? Pause if you need to. All right, guys, now, nationalist pressure. So, guys, the last thing I'm going to talk to you about is just some groups that are going to start putting pressure on more powerful groups, all right? Now, one of the first ones I want to talk to you about is Ireland, okay? Now, we haven't talked about Ireland in a while. The last time we did was we talked about the English Civil War and how the English were going in there and setting up these plantations and slowly trying to conquer Ireland, right? Well, and we talked about Cromwell going in there and murdering and massacring Irish people, right? Oliver Cromwell, English Civil War. But anyway, in 1801, okay, Great Britain had been colonizing Ireland for a long time, taking their land, all that stuff. And in 1801, Great Britain finally did the last thing to control Ireland. What they did was they abolished the Irish Parliament. They said, from now on, Irish Parliament does not exist. Now, instead, Irish people can now get elected to English Parliament. All right? So look at what they did there. They said, we're taking away your Parliament, but from now on, you're part of us. You can get elected to our Parliament and have a say. And guys, the Act of Union created what we call today, guys, Great Britain, or what we also call the United Kingdom. What's the United Kingdom, guys? England is the big one. Then they slowly conquered Scotland, and they slowly conquered Wales, and they slowly conquered Ireland. And guys, all of these things made up Great Britain or the UK. All right? Now, it's going to last like this until after World War I, and then some of the UK is going to break up. But right now, guys, in these notes today, 1801, that is the United Kingdom. Okay? Now, here's the problem right here. There's the United Kingdom, right? They just took over Ireland. Now, here's the problem. There's a lot of Irish people that do not like the English. Why? Well, Oliver Cromwell, massacres, murderers, butchers, all these wars, all right, all of these slaughters, all of these taking their land. There's a lot of Irish people that are like, we don't want to be a part of England, but the problem is, well, they just kind of got taken over, all right? And they want their own independent nation. They're like, look, we've got our own language. All right, we've got our Irish language, okay? We've got our own culture that's separate from English culture. We've got our own history that's separate from English history. We've got our own identity that's separate from English identity. So, guys, throughout the 1800s, the Irish are going to push for breaking away from the United Kingdom, and it's going to come to a head in World War I. Now, another group, Germans, all right? So, guys, if you looked at a map of Germans, guys, this is kind of Germany. You see France over there on the left, right? But everything to the right of the blue line, the north, the top on the right of the blue little line there, is technically Germany. Okay? Germany is called the German Confederation. We talked about it in our Napoleon notes. But basically, Germany is called the German Confederation. It's, it's a couple dozen states, and they're all kind of semi-independent. But you know what? Excuse me, guys, I keep coughing here. But you know what, guys? They don't speak German, right? So German nationalists start getting this idea. We all need to unite all of these states into one country. But the problem is, who gets to control that country? I'll give you a hint. It's the biggest, most powerful German state with the biggest military, which is Prussia. And eventually, guys, in a couple chapters, you're going to see Prussia conquer every other German state and unite it into one country. Germany's not the only one. Italy, guys, is made up of several different states, right? Now, this is Italy. They're different republics, guys, different states, different kingdoms. But some Italians are going to get the idea of, hey, we all speak Italian. We should all unite into one nation. The problem with that, guys, is some parts of Italy are controlled by Austria. Some parts of Italy are controlled by France. So what do you do here, right? But you're going to see later on in this, not in this chapter, guys, but later on in this quarter, you're going to see people are going to unite Italy into one nation, all right? So nationalist pressure, right? There are people that are starting to push for creating their own countries and unifying their own countries, all right? And like I said, if you saw a picture of the Austrian Empire on the other slide, guys, I showed you, Austrian Empire contains a vast number of different ethnicities, and they all want their own nation. So what I'm showing you guys is the 1800s are going to be an era of revolution and warfare. Why? One reason, on one hand, is nationalism. The other reason we're going to talk about tomorrow, liberalism. All right? Guys, that's the end of the notes. I'll see you tomorrow in class.